did a fair amount of work with the military, the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, and I was on the last committee for this, on how do we create the perfect soldier. Right?
Wow!
And I spent some years doing this, and one of the things that I brought up, starting a few years ago, in discussions in these, we'd meet in these Italian restaurants with no lights and nobody else there, was like,
really?
And have these wild conversations.
The restaurant was cleared out for you.
Yeah, and it seemed that way. It was like, I was looking, I said, what the hell's going on? You guys, every time you bring me to a restaurant, there's nobody around. It's like The Godfather or something. Yeah. But it was like, no, we just like this place. And so I would tell them about the brain, because they were trying to find ways, which I was on the committee, Jim Mattis's committee for this, which, the past couple of years.
Was it Jim Mattis's committee to find like the perfect?
Yeah. Okay. The best soldiering, and so I, with my group, we designed a series of experiments to show, by testing beforehand, who should and shouldn't go into the infantry, really.
Okay.
And that is, who would be most likely to get PTSD, most likely to commit suicide, most likely to be triggered to be sociopathic and come back from war, and there'd be killers.
Oh wow!
And so we had all these different markers, but also going in, we're using genetics and certain markers to select people, especially for infantry. It doesn't keep you out of 90% of it's not infantry; it's all the support. So it doesn't. It's because the head of the Army recruiting thought it would be like racist and everything. I said no. This is just to keep people out of, a shooting hot war. Yeah. Not to keep them out of the military, because I was very sensitive about that, right? Yeah. But anyway, with this, it was like how to test to be able to triage people, whether they're going to combat or what kind of service. So, and Jim Mattis, he told me in the last meeting we had, this is right before he retired, which is just didn't help the project. I mean, it's still sort of there, but and so. He liked a couple of ideas, like the whole plan. It was kind of expensive, but they had a lot of money. And but it was also, I kept pushing the idea, based on brain development, that nobody, regardless, should ever go into combat before they're 25 years old.
They're definitely not going to like that.
Well, it turns out in the past 3 months, it looks like they're going to do this.
Really?
Can you believe it? So it's the only good thing I've ever done. It's like, does it have an effect? So if this really works, it would be great, because I had to convince a couple of the generals, go through the whole brain thing of when the brain is susceptible and when people are most vulnerable. And I showed them at 25, 26 is the first time the brain really matures, where there's some balance between the emotional brain and the cognitive brain, and that there's less, it's after the time usually when people get depression, develop or schizophrenia, or they go on rampages, right? And I did this. I gave the same thing. Anybody who's interested in this, I gave a pretty good lay description for Gene Simmons' new book called 27.
Gene Simmons' new book?
The KISS guy, yeah.
Yeah.
and so he asked me to do like the last chapter on the kind of the brain basis. And 27 is the idea, and it was mostly from the 60s, when all these rockers, we were dying at 27 years old. So what is this mysterious thing? It's the myth of 27. And I said, well, it's kind of 27's a myth, even though there's a blip there. Mm-hmm. There's a blip of increased deaths and suicides, drug overdoses of musicians at 27, right?
Yeah.
But really, most of them die at 57. The book should be 57. That's when most of them,
Most of the rock stars?
Most of the musicians, artists, that's when they die, drug overdoses, suicide. But in it, I give the science behind this and the brain development. So it's called 27. If anybody, any listener should just get that. It's about this. Yeah. And I try to give enough science in there so it doesn't insult bright people.
Sure.
But not so jargony that it's going to be like, oh, Jesus, I don't.
Yeah. And
it's a chapter, so I would recommend it. I don't sell this book. I'm like anything, but it really fits with this, and so with the military, and when I gave some talks in Europe about, and somebody was there in Spain and in Portugal, and these two rock groups contacted me if I could use this idea that nobody should go to war before 25, right? Because they love this. I mean, this stuff, especially if you're under 25, you don't want to.
Yeah.
And so they put on their Facebook and they used that. This was, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago. This is before before this other stuff. And they loved it. I said, but there's the other shoe falls here. I said the sister argument is that not only you can't go to war, you shouldn't be voting either.
Oh, really?
I don't know how they ended up adjudicating that in their own, on their Facebook or their performances. So anyway.
So what sorts of people should not go into combat then?
Well, you have to really know your physiology and your genetics. Some people have forms of alleles that make them very susceptible to trauma.
Okay.
It's those people who have, they're related to anxiety and resistance to trauma. And some people, if you have, and it's not just one gene, it's usually 10, 15, 20 genes that are really determining these things. And if you happen to, you always have like a brother or sister has none of it. You'll always have a sibling or two that has, they're kind of in the middle, and then one who's got just wired for this.
Yeah.
And so you can't tell by looking at your parents or your family because just the way the genetics is rearranged.
Okay.
And so I wish I was more of a business person because I would create a chip and an app to determine this for people. I'm just not a business person, but maybe one of your viewers or listeners can put that together. I
hope, yeah.
Because with me, it's like I know what it takes to start and make a business successful, which is absolute dedication for about 7 to 10 years.
Right.
And I'm just too gabby and want to move on to the next thing.